Good morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Good morning,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Shabbos, Parak Yudala, chapter 14, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. I'm going to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Miss Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Basar Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer, learning Shabbat Aliyah for her neshama.
Amen.
Okay, Mishnah Aleph. Again, we're going to be discussing tzad and another malacha that comes about when you bruise an animal. If you strike an animal and you bruise it, you cause its blood to come to the, doesn't come through the skin, but up to the surface of the skin, you see a bruise. That also is forbidden to do on Shabbos. There are a number of explanations given. One explanation as to why if you bruise an animal, it's going to be forbidden, you have desecrated Shabbos, is because it falls under what's called mefarik. Mefarik means when you separate something from where it's naturally contained. There's a malacha called dash, threshing, where you're taking the kernel out of a husk, if that's the way to say it. And similar to that, if you take something that's contained in something naturally and you take it out, that's going to be part of that malacha. So the blood is contained inside the flesh or the skin, right? And then when you bruise the animal, the blood comes out of that place where it was contained. It comes up to the surface of the skin. So that is called chayvel. That's called damage. That's called wounding. It means bruising. And that is also an act that's forbidden to do on Shabbos. So the Mishnah says like this: Shemaina sharatzim hamurim b'Torah. The 8 sharatzim. Sharatzim are typically translated as creeping animals, slithering animals. The point is that you either have no legs or the legs are so small you don't really see them walking on them. But that's a sheretz. There are shemaina shratzim. There are 8 shratzim ha'amurim b'Torah that are mentioned in the Torah. Why are they mentioned in the Torah? They're mentioned in the Torah because when they die, their carcasses can make you tamei, can make you impure. But only 8 specific shratzim do that. There are other shratzim that don't do that. So when we'll go through the shratzim, we'll see through. Let's see. So what are those 8? We'll go through what those 8 shratzim are. Let's just finish the first statement of the Mishnah. Shemaina shratzim amurim b'Torah. The 8 shratzim mentioned in the Torah. Hatzadan b'chayev b'hen chayev. If you trap them, or you damage them, or you bruise them, you will be liable. You'll be considered desecrating Shabbos according to Torah law. Usha'ar shkatzim uramatzim. If we're talking about other vermin and other crawling animals, hachayev b'hen pater. The one who bruises them would be exempt. Hatzadan, the one who traps them, litzayrech, if it's for a need, meaning for needing those animals themselves, chayev, you'll be liable. Shaloi litzayrech, but if it's not for needing the animals themselves, pater, you will be exempt. Okay, so let's explain step by step here. The 8 shratzim that we say, that the Torah says that if they die, their carcasses, you come into contact with them, they can make you tamei. What are those 8 shratzim? They are, I'll use the Hebrew word and I'll give you the English translation they give here. One is called choyled, which they translate as a weasel. Achbar is a mouse. Tzav, they translate as a toad. Anaka is a hedgehog or porcupine. Those 2 different animals, the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Koach is a type of lizard. Lita is another type of lizard. Chaymet, they translate as snail. And tinshemes as a mole. Okay. Those are the 8 shratzim that if they die, their carcasses will make you impure. On the other hand, other types of these kinds of animals, like a worm, right, will not make you tamei. Dead worms will not make you tamei. They are not from the 8 shratzim that do that. Now, our discussion here is not about the impurity here. It's about that when you're dealing with these 8 shratzim, hatzadan v'chayev b'hen chayev. If you trap them or you bruise them, you'll be liable. You'll be liable for bruising them, as I explained before. When we say here that you're going to be liable for being chayev for damaging them, there has, as we said before, there's got to be a constructive purpose in why you're doing it. If you're just doing it not for a constructive purpose, you're doing it for some reason to hurt the animal, whatever it may be, or to possibly try to kill it, and you didn't kill it, you just bruised it, that would be makalko. That's called ruining. That's not a Torah prohibition. That's a rabbinic prohibition. So you'd have to be talking about that you bruise the animal for some kind of constructive purpose. An example that they bring down here would be you want to feed the blood-filled flesh to your dog. I guess blood-filled flesh is tasty to animals, and that would be a constructive purpose as to why you bruise the animal. Okay, so we say that for the Shemona Shratzim, if you bruise any of them, you will be liable. When it comes to other creeping animals, right, we say that if you bruise them, you will be pater. You'll be exempt. Now, it's the same case, right? Somehow or another, let's say we're talking about a snake. Okay, a snake is not one of the 8 shratzim, right? You went there and you whacked it, right? And you caused it you bruised it. You see the blood coming up on the surface of its skin. We say there, according to Torah law, you haven't desecrated Shabbos. Why? What's the difference? So now let me read to you from the bottom here. It's a very interesting explanation. Since the removal of blood is only temporary, it lacks significance and is not considered to have been extracted. In the case of the 8 shratzim mentioned above, however, one is liable for bruising since the blood is not reabsorbed by the body. Here's the point. By the 8 shratzim, if you go ahead and you bruise it, the blood is not going to be reabsorbed into the body. I mean, the blood goes away. The blue and black mark, right? Basically, it gets expelled from the body. Yeah. So when you're talking about these 8 shratzim or anything else that has a thick skin, that's the point. There's a thick skin. When it bruises, that means that the blood came out. It's not going to be reabsorbed back into the flesh. It's going to be expelled. So that means that in that case, the removal of the blood is permanent. But when you're dealing with these other kinds of vermin or other kinds of other creeping animals like a snake, without a thick skin, then we say that what's going to happen is the blood comes to the surface and it does get reabsorbed. Now listen to how they explain it. It's really interesting. The reason for this distinction has to do with the thickness of their skins. The 8 shratzim have a thick skin, and thus a bruise appears only when the inner layer of the skin tears, allowing blood to collect inside the skin and thus be visible from the outside. This torn skin eventually ruptures completely, causing the blood to leave the body before it has a chance to be reabsorbed. The other shratzim have a thin skin, so that a bruise is visible without the skin tearing. Thus, if there is only a bruise mark, it means that the blood will remain within the body and thus eventually be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So therefore, you're removing the blood from where it typically is only temporary. Since it's only temporary, it's not considered significant to be considered an act of desecrating Shabbos. Now, even in regard to other shratzim, one is exempt only for bruising them. One is liable, however, for inflicting a wound that caused them to bleed externally, since in that case, the blood is lost permanently. If you whack the snake and it bleeds on the outside, the blood comes out on the outside, that blood's not going back in. So then that kind of act of chayvel, of bruising, right, is going to be permanent. It's not temporary. And therefore, in that situation, you will be liable for desecrating Shabbos. Our Mishna is talking about chayvel, bruising. That means it was a black and blue mark. It didn't break through the skin, but only gathered under the skin. And in the case of the kinds of creeping animals that have a thin skin, there we say it's going to get reabsorbed, and therefore what you did to remove the blood from its usual place was only temporary, and therefore you're not liable for them. Now the Mishna continues. Regarding now, the Mishna said before, by the 8 shratzim that are mentioned in the Torah, if you hunt them, you're going to Hatzadan v'achaber chayev. If you trap them, you're chayev. Here, by the other ones that don't have the thick skin, that's just the ones that we're talking about, there we say, well, we'll see that is relevant here too. We say, if you trap them because you need them, then you're going to be liable. If you didn't trap because you need them, you're going to be exempt. So what's the case here? The case here is like this. We're talking about, let's say by the Shemona Shratzim, by the 8 Shratzim mentioned at the beginning of the Mishnah. the person who trapped them, there's two possibilities why you could be trapping any of these animals. You may have some purpose for them themselves, right? And or you want to get rid of them. You're trapping them because you don't want them around. Now, we've learned before that any malacha of Shabbos, to be liable for it, min Torah, has to be a constructive purpose. It has to be that you're doing it because you want it, not because you don't want it. That's called malacha, whether it's a malacha shetzricha lagufa or ein tzricha lagufa. Is it being done for its need because you need that thing itself, or because you want to get rid of it? If you want that thing, if you're doing it because you want that thing, that's called the Torah prohibition, a Torah malacha. If you're doing it because you're just trying to get rid of it, that's not a Torah prohibition. That's a rabbinic prohibition, at least according to the opinion of Reb Shimon, which our Mishnah is following. So therefore, it works like this. You've got this guy who trapped. And when he trapped the 8 shratzim, he did not express why he was trapping them. Is he doing it because he wants the weasel out of his garden? Or, believe it seems, though, in the times of the Mishnah, at least, people trapped weasels. Because since they have a thick skin, they use the skins. So the Shmeina Shratzim, they're called Bemina Nitza. They're the type of a species that is typically trapped for its usage of itself. It has a thick skin. The skins were used. So if a person goes and traps any of these 8 animals without expressing why he's doing it, we assume that why is he doing it? He's doing it to trap it. Because that's what people typically will trap. People very often, or even typically, will trap these eight specific shratzim for the purpose of using its skin, using it itself. Okay. Now, when it comes to the other ones, like the snakes or the worms or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we would say snake skins. People use snake skins, but it seems like in the times of the Mishnah, it was not that used. And therefore, you have to specifically say when you're trapped, it has to be you have to specifically, in order for us to know what you're doing in this kind of case, you have to basically express, are you trapping that snake because you want the snake? Maybe you want to take its venom for medicinal purposes, right? Mm-hmm. Or are you trapping the snake because you don't want it in your garden? So that's what the Mishnah says, Hatzadin, let's say Rechayev. If he expresses that he is trapping it for the use of the snake itself, of this kind of sheket zerebes itself, then he's going to be liable for trapping. If it's not for the need of the animal itself, then that means he's doing it to get rid of the animal. That's called malacha shenetzricha lagufa. It's an act that's not for its designated for its defined purpose. You're going to be exempt. Again, exempt here means min Torah. According to rabbinic law, it would be forbidden to do. The Mishnah concludes, Chaya v'oiv sheber shusai, a chaya, a wild animal, or a bird that's under your control. Under your control means, let's say it's in an enclosed area, so there's no, it's accessible to you, right? You don't gotta run around and chase it anymore to get it. Mm-hmm. It's in a place in your house where it's accessible to you, okay? Or, as is brought down here on the bottom, any animal that has been trained to return to its owner at night is considered under the control of the owner even when it is outside his property. So your dog, your whatever, right? That comes back to you, right? And therefore, even if it's getting out of hand, you got to chase it down and run after it. That's not considered. That's not called trapping it on Shabbos. Right. Forgetting about the other Shabbos issues about dealing with animals, but just from the point of trapping, you would not have the malach of trapping. Right. So we say like this: the chaya v'oiv sheber shusai, this wild beast, this wild animal like a deer or whatever, or the bird that was under your control. Hatzadan potter, you trap them, meaning you grab hold of them and you have a stronger control over them than before. That's going to be potter. That's exempt. It's already trapped. You're not doing anything more. Now, on the other hand, if you go ahead and you bruise them, you wound them, you would be chayiv, because these animals have a thick skin, even the birds, I guess, and the bird skin was used, and these skins were used for these. Wait a minute. Right. I'm sorry. They have thick skins. Forget about you use them. That has to do with trapping. We're talking about bruising them, right? They have thick skins, and therefore, because they have thick skins, when you bruise them, the blood will not be going back to its original place, right? It's therefore considered removed from its original place on a permanent basis, and therefore you will be liable for bruising them on Shabbos. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.